Hello, hello. We are back with Words First Marketing. I'm Matt Banker, and today I have Kelly Sjol. She is the founder of Storify Marketing, and she's a Storybrand guide that primarily works with B2B SaaS and tech companies. And so we're going to have a conversation today about how do businesses in that space implement Storybrand, where do they get hung up, and what are the things they really need to pay attention to when they're thinking about how to better use Storybrand principles in their own marketing and communications and all that. So, Kelly, welcome. Give us give us your background. Why do you work with tech companies?
Yeah, hey Matt, it's great to be with you today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So, my background actually is in higher education. That's where I started my career, did marketing within higher ed for about 20 years. So, I have always worked with nerds. That kind of at the end of the day, I've always worked with PhDs, academics, researchers. So, that is my jam. Nerds are my jam. Tech was a very easy, sort of easy thing to sort of move into after higher ed because I'm based in Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh
Mm.
does have a burgeoning tech scene. I wanted to be right in the middle of that. So that's primarily why I position myself within tech. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
What do what do tech people love about Storybrand, and what do they struggle with? That's kind of an open-ended question, but how would you answer that?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to, the more user focused a company already is. So, I'm talking about we all sort of design for users in a way, but are they product based? Are they service based? So I feel like the more centered they are in their user, so they're familiar with design thinking, they're familiar with human-centered design, they're already thinking along the lines of like designing for a user, of designing a user experience that's going to be centered on the user. They are the ones that I find that embrace Storybrand right away because the concept makes sense to them. Maybe they haven't been doing it, maybe they have been painting themselves as the hero. After all, these are engineers, these are developers, they're super smart, and their tech is in a lot of ways, it's complex, it might be deep. So maybe up until now, they've been making themselves the focus and their product, the features, the focus. But if I find that they really embrace that aspect of Storybrand, that your customer is the hero, the user is the hero. So yeah, I mean that hopefully that answers the first part of the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, so they, especially folks who are understanding that kind of human-centered design, and they're thinking about how do we make this as easy as possible for the end user of the product. But you work primarily with B2B SaaS, right? And so you and I were talking about this a bit before. The user might be a member on a team, but the buyer or the decision maker or the committee is not necessarily the one that is experiencing the pain that this product or service solves, and the buyer is not necessarily going to use the product a lot. And so there's kind of this switch in terms of marketing, like who the customer you're marketing to, and the product, who the product is for, are not always the same person. Is that fair? And maybe unpack that for us a bit more.
Yes, that is 100% accurate. I don't think I've worked with a client yet that we haven't had a lot of back and forth about this. So actually, who is the hero? Who is the
Mhm.
customer? Because again, they're so used to focusing on the users. They design experiences for users, and that is who is in their head, that they're trying
Mhm.
to get inside the user's head. Well, now it's taking them out of that and saying, okay, no, who is actually buying the product or service that you're selling? It's like, oh, okay, wow. And so that's a huge shift for them. And in so many cases, and these are for established companies, they have not given it any thought. I mean, their sales team has,
Right.
but as a company, as a brand, like they really haven't focused on this character at all, the buyer. So yes, that is where we start. We always start with that conversation, and again, it fits in a lot of times with how they're already thinking. They're thinking
Mhm.
in terms of a user journey. We flip it over to a buyer journey, And when we make it all about the buyer and we start to have that conversation, a lot of times then it clicks for them. Like, okay, wow, this is a completely different person. And then it's really exciting for them to think about, okay, what is this person's aspiration? How do we get them from here to there? How do we make them the hero within, their company? How do we make their company, how do we look at success for their company? How do we look at success for them personally? It's why I love B2B. It's that added element of the business, the character of the business, and the actual business person that we're selling to. So yeah, it's a tough hurdle, but once we, get over it together, then we're just off to the races.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a totally different world, but one of the, I don't know, an analogy I think of is companies who sell like a service or a product that is meant for kids, but they're always selling to the parents, right? And so
Right.
this person, up in the organization, they do care about the flourishing, the happiness of their team, but they're like the things that they actually care about, it's still a little bit of a subtle shift. They're not necessarily motivated, like I don't know, I think about this kid analogy. Like when you market to kids, you want like everything to be like bright colors and like making a lot of noise and all of that, and like kids love all that, but that's not necessarily like what the parents want for their kids either, right? And so
Yes.
you got to be thinking about like this is a, maybe a C-suite level person
Hmm.
who's talking about their, like, your product's going to help their sales team or it's going to help their customer service department, but they, like, all of the wish list of everybody in those departments may not exactly line up with what the business priorities are or what the
Exactly.
C-suite,
Hmm.
person cares about for them or, for the business. Okay, so you mentioned maybe like B2B, right? When people think about tech and SaaS, a lot of times they think about like product led, like direct to consumer type things, but we're talking about how do you talk to businesses. And you also, though, there's a difference between if you have a product or a service. Now, in Storybrand world, if you've been to workshops or you read the book, almost all of the examples and things that they give are, well, they're generally a B2C example, right? So it's like a lawn care business or it's a donut shop or something like that. And so there's like once you start implementing Storybrand, sometimes people I find get caught up and they're not quite sure how exactly this translates when they're dealing with B2B. And then on top of that, when you're dealing with like a service instead of a product, the concepts make a ton of sense to people, but then when it comes to implementation, it gets a little difficult. So in that, like that switch from B2C to B2B, what are some of the common conversations that tend to come up and things that you need to think about? It's like a super open-ended question.
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. I mean, that objection typically is addressed in the sales process. So before we even get into the messaging, before we even get into the actual execution of StoryBrand, that's one of the first objections that comes up if it's there. And again, it depends on how deeply they've delved into, have they done Business Made Simple? How much of it have they consumed?
Mm-hmm.
Have they done a live workshop? But yes, that is a very common question, objection, concern. I think probably the way I tend to address it, and even as it comes up through our going through the whole process, is, just the human aspect. Like, we're all people selling to people. At the end of the day, like, we're just like you're, designing for humans, just like you're designing a product for humans, just like you're delivering a service to humans. People buy from people. And so there is a lot of, that's where I think the common, the carryover is. It's like, yes, maybe this is a product that looks different from yours. It's an audience that looks different from yours, but we still got to hit this. We still got to go through those steps to really nail that position and nail that, who your audience is. And, there's still some fundamental questions that we still need to answer if we're going to be able to reach, your target audience member, whether they're in a business context or whether it's in a business context or not. So yeah, I mean, it's that common ground of just we're people, and we need to appear
Mm.
as human as we possibly can. We still need to build trust. We still need to build authority. We still need to have empathy, regardless of whether it's a B2B or B2C kind of situation.
Yeah. I think classically when people are talking about like tech solutions, engineers, nerds like love the problem that they're solving and can get
Hmm.
really focused on like all of the cool things that our thing can do. Like the
Yes.
features and all of that. And do you find that is it difficult for the audience that or the customers that you work with to kind of let go of some of that like feature focused language and emphasis and move more into the benefits and kind of aspirational side that Storybrand really helps encourage you to do?
It is. Oh my goodness. It is so difficult. I mean, I have a client that I'm working with right now. The entire leadership team is engineers.
Mhm.
They don't get it. They just like I mean, I love them and they're amazing at what they do. But it is very difficult to move them past. And I think what it is like, as we move through the framework, because and again, this goes back to kind of the genius of the framework. They do have their chance to really
Mhm.
talk about, all of these things that go into the product that make it great. They don't all make it into the final version, but they
Yeah.
do have their opportunity to really get into that. But then I push them further than that. Okay, yes, you're telling me that, you know, it does XYZ. But,
Mhm.
getting back to what we were saying earlier with the business outcomes, what does this mean for the business? What does
Mhm.
success look like? And oftentimes it takes two or three times, two or three rounds of that question.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, but we're still not there. We're still not there. But once we get there and those things actually resonate with them, even with the engineers, because they've seen it. Like they've
Mhm.
seen it in the clients that they work with, they've seen it in their own customers, and it's all about story, right? It's all
Yeah.
so those stories start to come to their mind of the times that they really honed in on their why, or the times that they really saw a client experience success. Then it starts to be a little bit more real and personal for them. I think that's the key, is just,
Mhm.
they're so used to standing on that, on the features of the
Mhm.
product. But yeah, it's tapping into their why, because we all have that.
Sure.
That really gets them excited about what they do. Then yeah, that's what gets the good results.
I think there's a lot of what we would call cursive knowledge in
Hmm.
when you're a really smart person, you know so much about it that you intuitively understand how such and such feature leads to like whatever outcome, and it's almost like you can't separate those two things. Like, well, obviously because it does this you're going to get this. And I like to think about it, or I use the word picture of like a connect the dots picture, right? And so your features are all those different dots, and you can give someone a page that has the dots, right? And if you look at it, you can kind of get the outline. You can kind of tell what this is as an adult. I've got a 4-year old, and she may not know that it's going to be an elephant yet, but I can kind of like see that there. But when you're able to use language to really the lines that connect those dots, those are like the benefits or the outcomes, and then you're really able to paint the full picture, and they can see how the features lead to these other things that are, and that's the stuff that actually drives sales, right? People are
Yes.
buying, I mean, the old adage is like they're not buying a quarter-inch drill bit, they're buying a quarter-inch hole. Like that's what they actually want.
I'm totally gonna steal that, connect the dots. I love that. It's good.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the other things that you found? Everybody like learns differently and kind of goes through the process of figuring out their story brand script and doing wireframes. What are some of the things that you found have been really helpful to make that process go well for engineers and people that are kind of in that more like technical space?
Yeah, so I try to speak their language. I try to approach it as, this works especially well when I'm working with service-based firms that, maybe they do UX design, maybe they do, development and software engineering. I try to approach the process in a very similar way that they do with their clients. Mm. And then, as far as the actual messaging sessions, themselves, I do my sessions on Miro. Mm-hmm. So it's, we're all online together and can really get a good visual of exactly they can see exactly what we're doing. They can, give input throughout the process. That to them is very similar to a design thinking. It's a very common platform for a design thinking workshop. And so that it's just trying to make them feel comfortable, like they can kind of feel like, oh wow, this is familiar, because maybe going into it they're thinking, I hate marketing. Why is my boss making me do this? Or like I don't understand what I'm going to contribute to this. A lot of times, I love having ears in the room, but that is a lot of times, they're thinking that's, this is not going to work for them, or they're going to feel out of place. Or so, yeah, I try to set the stage in a way that's familiar to them so that we can, kind of overcome that fear.
Do most of your clients, when you start working with them, are they already bought in to Storybrand? They understand it and they want to do Storybrand, or is it that they've heard that Kelly is really great with words and they want to work with Kelly, but you have to then introduce them to the process?
Yeah, so I would say lately, like in the past couple of years, I've gotten a lot more Storybrand aware clients than I ever was at the beginning. My general rule when a client comes to me, and maybe it's through word of mouth, maybe it's through a referral, and they have no background at all with Storybrand, they've never heard of it, I do not introduce it into the process. I don't ever use those words. I will, however, especially with using the Miro board. So I'll refer to it as a messaging framework. This is a brand message framework. And I will, use very simple visuals to sort of say, hey, we're trying to take our buyer from here to there. What is it that we're doing to help them get from here to there? What problem are they experiencing right now? That's kind of how I set the stage, like just very simple language to kind of get a commonality. Like, let's all get on the same page here. But I don't introduce Storybrand. I don't try to teach them Storybrand if they don't know Storybrand.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a testament to how powerful it is as a tool and a framework. Is it's not good because it's associated with a brand. It's good because it is a really good tool, and like you said, to get everybody on the same page. I think one of the things I found, a lot of businesses don't realize this when they first start working with a Storybrand guide or with a guide strategist, copywriter, who, however they think of you. They don't realize how helpful it is to have a third party outside voice and for that person to have a structured framework. Because I think in a lot of businesses, especially if you've got multiple stakeholders or like a team or a committee, the default is then to like go to the loudest or most insistent voice in the room. And so like the strongest opinion wins out, not necessarily the best one. And I don't know, in tech companies, is that typically maybe the most knowledgeable, proficient person? Maybe that's one of the reasons why a lot of these companies end up with so many features and kind of jargony language, because they're relying on the person who knows the most to like come up with the ideas. But is that similar to what you've experienced?
It really does depend on who's in the room. So if I've got if they do have an internal marketing person and that marketing person is in the room, I have seen, higher level people defer to that marketing person because they don't have the confidence that they are going to say the right words. Because when I'm asking those questions, it is because they've never thought about it in that way before. there's hesitation. Like, I'm going to say the wrong word. Marketing person, you know words, you answer the question. So and that's why I do like to get those different voices, and especially, a salesperson. A lot of times they will have the voice of the customer. So the voice of the customer is really important to introduce. And, the ideal situation is when everyone defers to the voice of the customer.
Yeah.
That doesn't always happen, especially when you have a really established company and a really, they've been around for a long time and they really know their stuff. And, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about. No, they're just your customer.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the success a lot of times does depend on, how attuned they are to the voice of the customer. Have they taken that time to really drill down, be intentional about who they're targeting? And this is not always personas. A lot of times they get wrapped up in personas, all of the details around personas. No, that's not really the same thing. It's, have you talked to your customer? Have you surveyed your customer? Have you interviewed your customer in depth? And so, yeah, I'd say, the ideal situation is when they're deferring to the voice in the room that is the one who has that closest relationship with the customer and really understands. So, and when there's, and, you get those team dynamics, you get those where, no one's really sure who to defer to. And yeah, that's when can be trouble.
I like to start off like initial engagements. I try to get everyone who has a voice or a vote or a veto, I think are the three, about this project. I want them in the room for the first session. And that's really about like getting everyone on the same page. But it's not always beneficial to have all of those people like doing the actual work. Do you have kind of an ideal, like if you could pick your dream team within a company of who are you working, like that small group, which voices do you want on that team to help work through the framework and develop the brand script for a company?
Yeah, I would say, the founder is great to have there, again, as long as there's that respect for the rest of their team. So I would say the founder, the person who owns the marketing function, and the person who owns the sales function. Typically that's enough, but I have, and sometimes the clients that I'm working with, a lot of the times even the people who fill those roles have some kind of an engineering background, so they can still speak to things that would be important. They kind of have a very deep understanding of the product or service, and they can still speak to that. I would say, those three would probably be my ideal. But yeah, I agree with that approach, to get everyone in the room for just that very first, kind of kick off. Okay, who do we really need to have? And I actually have had clients who've had a director of client success, a great person to have as well.
Yeah, it's another client facing, like they're hearing from their customers about what problems they're encountering and that kind of stuff. If you've looked at a lot of Storybrand websites, you can kind of recognize like a Storybranded website. Now, I'm gonna caveat this to say, if you're a business owner and you go out looking for a Storybrand guide, you'll probably see a lot of websites that look kind of similar. But then if you actually compare yourself, you look at your competitors and things, it's not as common as you might think it is in the world. So this is kind of my caveat. But Storybrand sort of has a fairly established way of building, we're talking websites here, building out the kind of look and flow of a website. Tech and like SaaS also seems to have a really, I don't know, to me it feels like it's becoming almost more and more rigid or the same. Like every tech or SaaS company website kind of looks similar. There's always a lot of temptation that you feel like you got to look like your industry in order to be taken seriously. And so I think there's a lot of pull for a business to want to look like other tech and SaaS companies. And then there's this like Storybrand thing. Do you, I know neither of us think that those things are in conflict, but how do you go about kind of solving that problem? Do you tell them, hey, let go of SaaS, let's really embrace Storybrand? Is it a mixture? What are those kind of conversations looking like?
Yeah, I honestly haven't had too many clients that have come to me that they're holding tightly to any particular template or framework. You're totally right that they probably it's one of those, if I see it, I'll know,
Hmm.
what it is, but they don't necessarily can't recognize that's the case, coming in. And so they tend to be pretty open, especially if they're looking to me to be the expert. It's typically further down the process. So once we've
Hmm.
already done the copy, we've already done the wireframing, then we get to the point where we have like an actual website for them to look at. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, this isn't, no, we need this section and we need this, and we need to have, there should be more on here about,
Hmm.
the getting it back to the features conversation. And so that's typically where it shows up, is like they feel like those things are missing, but then, it's just reminding them, going back to that user experience, focus. Okay, but who is it that's actually visiting the website? Who's actually coming to
Hmm.
the website? What's important to them? Back to that, our buyer is the hero conversation. And then it
Hmm.
starts to make a little bit more sense. A lot of times, though, they do have to sort of see it before those immediate objections come to the surface. But after we have the conversations, it's usually worked out pretty well, where they've embraced the sort of the new
Yeah.
paradigm.
So they've kind of embraced, like, all right, we're gonna lean into Storybrand, and they get down that path, and then they realize it actually leads to a different place than where
Yes,
their competitors are, and then all of a sudden there's a little bit of this, like, oh no, what did we what did we do, like, did we make the
yes,
right choice, right?
yes, yeah,
The path you choose leads
right.
to a different destination, it turns out. I mean, a good one, I hope, and I think. Are there any other, like, out with Storybrand or outside of Storybrand? Are there any other, like, sticking points that you find, folks in that space really struggle with?
The problem piece.
Mm.
Yeah, the problem piece. You had mentioned it before, like engineers, they do what they do they solve problems. Like that's what they do. They solve problems. And, so it's when we get to that problem piece, it's hard to frame it so that they understand, and I even have a hard time sometimes. Like it is a different way of looking at a problem as being that obstacle. Like, what is that thing that's standing in the way? And a lot of times, what helps them get through that is thinking about the alternatives. We
Mm.
have that conversation of, okay, what are they doing right now that's not working? And typically with any kind of a software solution, they're either following a cobbled together off the shelf automated solution, or it's manual. It's a manual process. It's usually one of those two things. So when you frame it that way, it makes a little bit more sense. Okay, so why, like, what they're doing right now isn't working. Why isn't it working as it relates to, sort of that solution that we provide? And so it's where that sort of backpedaling sometimes comes in, is when we're visiting the problem, and then sometimes that shakes other things up. It's like once we actually define the problem, which they're used to doing. Again, they
Hmm.
do this all the time. Like we need to define the problem, define the problem. But sometimes once we do that, it just throws everything else off. And so and that's a hard thing too, because these are linear thinkers.
Hmm.
They like to say, okay, problem, solution, the problem, this is the solution and this is the
Hmm.
result. Every time it's always going to work that way. So it's working with, clients who typically are very linear thinkers, and helping them to sort of look at things a different way. Well, sometimes we actually need to go back and revisit, because our problem has taken the conversation in another direction, like once we have defined the problem. So yeah, I'd say that's a really difficult piece of it.
Is it difficult to, like, choose a problem, like, the framing? And I mean, again, the more you know about something, you know that this could solve different problems for different people, or, like, a different customer might think about it different ways. I don't know if that's really I see you nodding your head. I think that's a problem for a lot of clients, whether they're in the tech space or anywhere else, is this idea that you need to choose one. And actually, I think that that's one of the things that's really beneficial about going through the Storybrand framework is there are different problems you could choose to focus on, but something that's really powerful in the end result for your marketing is actually just making a choice. And I mean, the nice thing about websites and most marketing is it's not like you have to make a choice forever, but you do have to make. What's worse, though, is you can't make a choice like, okay, we're just going to emphasize these 7 things. And then if that doesn't work, you're nowhere closer to figuring out what will work. But if you do make a more specific choice, you can start to like narrow that down. If it's not totally correct the first time, you do have the option to pivot a little bit.
Yeah, that has so many different, applications. It's, the conversation about if you appeal to everyone, you're going to end up appealing to no one. If you try to appeal to everyone, and then that gets into the use case conversation as well, because it's always like, well, yeah, but what about all these other use cases? And so that, especially with a newer business, it's just starting out and just not really sure, again, not really selling on a use case. And that's why just positioning in general is so important. And just making that decision. This is where we are positioning ourselves. This is who we're going to serve. And then not until you see success, once you kind of see success, then you can expand those use cases elsewhere. But yeah, that is hard.
Yeah. Storybrand's I feel like it's a really great shortcut to doing a lot of this stuff, but they're also, you could dig deeper in any one of these areas and it would be beneficial, right? Like we kind of substitute really deep, say like surveys and customer research for like understanding that an owner or a salesperson is going to have a lot of that knowledge in them. And so we use that knowledge to inform the marketing. But if you could do the customer research to really identify these are the problems that I have or that get solved, that would be great. Same thing with positioning. You could go through a months long process of really figuring out exactly how to position yourself in the marketplace compared to your competitors. And I'm sure that would be super beneficial. But a lot of times if you're in a business do you work with a lot of like investment backed companies, or are these more like bootstrapped? Because I know with investment backed companies, there's a lot of pressure to move quickly and you don't have time often to do all of these things that would be great, but you don't.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that I work with one more than another, but yeah, that's always a consideration. Your investors, when you're venture backed, yeah, that's always, a consideration, and the time factor can be huge, especially when you're looking to launch, a new product or a new service or enter into a new market. Yeah. There's not a lot of time. So you are sometimes going on assumption, and that's not.
Yeah. And it's in some ways, you can approach marketing even with like an agile framework of, you work on a thing, you ship it, you iterate, you like improve it, you ship it again. That's not a terrible way to work on marketing, especially if you have someone to kind of guide you in those conversations and improve upon it, month after month as you get more information about your customers and whatever else.
Yeah, and it's a great way to approach it. But a lot of times, when these companies are coming to me and they have worked with agencies, they feel very restricted. And in addition, they're being asked to invest very, huge amounts of money up front. So there's a lot more, kind of fear there and resistance to more of an agile process. So yeah, that a lot of times is how they would like to approach it. But in the past, that hasn't been their experience.
Yeah. Is there anything else just kind of on your mind, either about the services that you provide or like your approach to marketing that sets you apart, even within like having that framework, I think sets a lot of marketers apart from sort of the general agency world, but you have a specific space within even the Storybrand community. What else should people know about Kelly and Story?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so much benefit to being very focused in who I serve. So making that decision, going all in on tech, specifically B2B tech, specifically, product development, software
Mhm.
development, enterprise SaaS, that has really just being able to go deep in terms of the expertise that I'm able to offer.
Mhm.
I've seen so much benefit from that, and my clients have seen so much value from that because we're starting from a certain level. They come to me and like there is no real warm up period. Like certainly
Mhm.
I take the time to really get to know, I have a very in-depth questionnaire. I take the time to get there to know their business, as best I can, but they can they can really have that confidence in just in my level of expertise and just being able to again speak the same language, start from the same level, but then serving as that translator through the whole process. So
Mhm.
being the one who is positioned between them and their buyer, I think is a huge value to my clients. Being able to speak the language of the buyer, the language of the and I've gotten some, it's been interesting because there's first impression, sometimes it's like, well, I'll give you an example. So I love robotics. I love robots. I
Mhm.
love working with robotics clients. I think that they're amazing. Like they're so passionate. They are so passionate about their robots. And I had some experience with that. My husband actually taught robotics when he was teaching, and so he did the competition, some of the competitions and stuff, and just the pride in the robot and what the robot can do. So a lot of times, in initial conversations with the robotics company or with the robotics engineer, there's some hesitation there because they think, well, they look at me, as like a first impression. They're just like, well, like, what do you know about, what I do, or why do you even
Right.
care? Like, but then when I really demonstrate to them just the level of excitement that I have for their robot, then it's just like just watching them completely transform in front of my eyes. So you get like this nerdy, like socially awkward, kind of robot guy, which is my favorite. And then just like for them to realize like, wow, this person actually really cares about what my robot does. And so it's
Mhm.
like starting there, like with a genuine excitement and curiosity for the tech
Mhm.
and what it does and how it works. And yeah, talk to me about that. I really want to know. But then being able to come in with this outsider's voice, because again, it's so important to have that outside voice that says, you're not being clear. Like, yeah, like you're not going to get, like, do you want the same level of excitement from your buyer that I have, about your robot? Well, then we're going to need to get more clear about how this is going to how this is going to bring them value, how this is going to help their business succeed, what kinds of, business outcomes. So, all those things to the table.
Yeah, there's so much of that that resonates with me. I work primarily with accounting firm owners, and I have a degree in fine arts, which is pretty different than most of my clients. Like their background is like, math guys, and I'm totally from the art side of things. But being able to be like that outside marketer can be a placeholder for your customer is so important in this process. But they're on your team too, right? You're on the team of your clients to help them communicate their message really clearly, but you can also sit in the seat of their customers and really give them a better view of how effective they're being in their communication, that they don't necessarily, again, it's kind of that curse of knowledge, but just it's hard to when you're so close to a project or a
Hmm.
technology or whatever, it's so hard to sit then in the seat of a person who doesn't know nearly as much, but also that you want them to care. So I think that's great. There's a huge benefit, obviously, to your customers working with someone who has a deep knowledge. A trade-off or a challenge, I think, for us marketers. I don't know if you feel this way. I love to solve new problems, and so when I decided to choose a niche, I was worried, am I going to get bored working with the same types of companies over and over again? but this is me encouraging other marketers to choose a niche. There's a different level of satisfaction when you develop like deep expertise in or with one type of company. It turns out there's actually a lot more to learn, like and every client that you work with benefits. The next client benefits from all of that experience you've had before, and so it really stacks on top. And then you as a marketer, that's really satisfying, I think, like to be able to bring that level of expertise.
Yeah. I have seen that played out so many times. Yes, it's absolutely true.
Well, Kelly, thank you for being on Words First. This is tech and SaaS. There's a ton of that happening. If someone's listening to this and they've got a company, how would they know if they're a good fit to work with you, and how would they find you?
Yeah, so they can come to my website, storifymarketing.com, have a look around. I just recently redid it, so I'd love to hear feedback on that. I did it on Webflow.
Nice.
So if you're considering, maybe branching out to Webflow, let's talk about that. But yeah, spend some time hanging out there, and let's just have a conversation. Let's get on a call. And I would just love to hear, from you just more about your business, more about just what really what you've done in the past marketing wise, and what you're hoping to do. And I want to know all about your business, and I want to know how I can help you be successful in whatever we do together. So
very good. We will put links in the show notes to Storify and probably to Kelly's profile on LinkedIn or something like that. And you can connect with her there. This has been the Words First Marketing Podcast, and thanks for listening.